Hey everyone,
Hey everybody.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Today we're going to be doing a Q&A. It's been, I don't know, probably a year since we did a Q&A now, and we get a ton of questions on Instagram and Facebook all the time, and it's nice to do these Q&A videos where we can kind of expand a little bit more in video form instead of just trying to respond by text. It's definitely a lot easier to give context and stuff in video. So we've got about 13 questions that people asked over the last couple weeks that we'll go through. And then if anybody watching live has any questions, we'll take those at the end as well.
All right, so just to do some quick introductions. Thanks for joining us. Hey to everyone that's watching live, either on Facebook or Instagram, and shout out to those of you that will listen later on the podcast and YouTube. We're Whitney and Jared Kazaza, and we are both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We've been travel therapists on and off for 10 years now. We started out when we were new grads in 2015, so we have a lot of experience with travel therapy over the years. Learning a lot about the industry. We also achieved financial independence early into our careers after 3 years of working full time. So since 2018, we've only been working sporadically throughout the year. It's been quite a bit actually now. It's been almost a year since our last travel therapy contract. And we also have just recently started our family. So we have a baby now. So that's a little bit of background on us for those of you that may not know us. We did get quite a few travel therapy questions, but we also got some finance questions. There's a few about specifically financial independence, some about traveling with a family. We get a lot of questions about that since we now have a family. So yeah, we'll start digging into some of these questions. Also, if you all have any questions while we're on live on Facebook or Instagram, feel free to leave those in the comments and we'll answer there as well. We'd love if you just say hello in the comments and let us know you're watching. Hi, Allie. I see you're signing on Facebook. There's a lot of folks over on Instagram. Hey, Kaylee, Caleb, Allison. Nice to see you guys. Let us know if you have any questions as we go through or any other questions that you can think of.
All right, so the first question is how to negotiate housing for Furnished Finder or Airbnb. This is a good question for Whitney because she does all of the or at least she did all the house hunting when we were on contracts.
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar, for finding short-term housing, two of the most common sites to use for short-term housing as a travel therapist are Furnished Finder and Airbnb. Airbnb is getting a lot worse these days for long-term stays because they have a lot more fees associated with it. So we have browsed on Airbnb before, but we've never actually booked a place through Airbnb. And we hear from a lot of folks that it's just not worth it anymore to book directly through Airbnb because the fees are so high, it makes it so expensive. But what we do hear from a lot of people is that they will try to message the landlord on Airbnb and see if they're willing to negotiate with them off the site and just do something more direct that's not through that platform so that they don't get hit with all those fees. So that is something that you can try in terms of negotiating the price if you see it on Airbnb. We've also heard of some people maybe signing up for an Airbnb for the first week or month that they're there, kind of get a feel for it. And then if they wanted to stay in that unit longer, then negotiate something off the platform with that landlord. But again, it just kind of depends on the landlord as to how that's going to work, if they're going to be willing to do that sort of thing. Sometimes if you explain your situation that you are a travel healthcare professional, they'll understand. Not always. Whereas Furnished Finders is more designed specifically for travel healthcare professionals. And there is more room for negotiation there because it's really just a way for them to advertise. You don't ever actually book through Furnished Finder the way you do through Airbnb. You just get in contact with them and then you negotiate everything off the platform. And so you probably have a better time with Furnished Finder in that regard.
Yeah, and just in general, negotiating anything like we've talked about with travel contracts in the past, it depends on how many options you have. So say you go on Furnished Finder and there's 10 good options and you're like, okay, well, I want to find the cheapest one or I want to negotiate the price down. That's the perfect opportunity to do that because then you can go to each one and say hey, there's several good options. I was just wondering, would you be willing to take $100 less if I stay at your place? Something like that, then you're in a great position. But, say you're looking Hawaii or Alaska where we had a lot of trouble finding housing, you're not going to be able to really negotiate a lot off the price because there's a lot of demand for those places. Yeah. So supply and demand applies to any kind of negotiation. So if you're going somewhere where there's a lot of options, you're going to be able to really try to negotiate on the price. If you're going somewhere where options are very limited, you're probably going to not have a lot of ability to negotiate.
Yeah. One more thing I would say that some people will have luck with is if you're willing to stay longer, they might be more willing to negotiate the price. So if you know for a fact that you're going to be there for 3 months or even 6 months or 9 months, if you're willing to stay longer, they might be willing to give you a cheaper price. But if you're saying, it's definitely going to be month to month, I really need that month to month because I don't know if my contract's going to get canceled, they may not be as willing to negotiate. So really just depends, but you can try to ask.
Yeah, I guess one other thing to add is every now and then you might be able to negotiate something where you do additional things at the property for lower rent. So say you do the yard work, or you agree to clean the whole house or something if you're staying in a room in a house, and you get a discount that way. We've heard of people doing that kind of stuff, especially for people that live in RVs. There's definitely situations where you stay at a campground and you can agree to do like maintenance around the campground for decreased rent or free rent. So those types of opportunities, they're not real common, but sometimes it might be the perfect situation where you can do something like that.
All right, so the next question that we got is, as a new grad, when should I be inquiring or reaching out about jobs? And do I have to wait for my license to come through? So in general, for everybody, we recommend you start getting in contact with recruiters about 2 to 3 months out from your anticipated start date. So when you're a new grad, or an anticipated new grad, you're going to be graduating. You need to also think about when's graduation date, but when am I taking my board exam? So if you graduated in May, but you're not taking your board exam till July, then we would look at, when are you actually planning on starting a contract? Probably more like July or August, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with the other question, do I have to wait for my license? Yes, in most circumstances, the facilities are going to want you to already have your license in hand before you can start. Very rarely will they ever let you work on a temp license. I think we've only heard of that like once or twice, and it was usually when they already had a relationship with the facility and they were willing to kind of bend those rules. But for the most part, they need you to go ahead and be licensed, have passed your exam, have your state license, because in order to work as a temp employee with a temporary license, they have to have someone to supervise you and sign your notes, and they may not have the staffing, or they may just not want to go out on a limb to help you with that. So like I said, in general, we recommend 2 to 3 months before your anticipated start date, not your graduation date, is a good time to go ahead and get the ball rolling and talking to recruiters. And they can go ahead and do things like set up your profile, get your resume and your references, and get everything ready to go for when it is time to submit you to jobs. Sometimes they will submit you before you actually have your license completed. But in general, we do recommend waiting to be submitted for jobs until you have your license.
Yep. Next question is the bill rate confidential between the recruiter and the facility? So it's a good question. It kind of depends on the company. Some companies are way more, I would say, strict about not wanting to share the bill rate, not wanting recruiters to share the bill rate with travelers. Some don't really care that much. Some recruiters are more lenient on that than others. It also a lot depends on your relationship with the recruiter. So we have recruiters we've worked with now for 10 years that they trust us. We know what we're talking about. They'll tell us the bill rate. It's not a big deal. Why would a recruiter or a company not really want to tell travelers the bill rate? Well, there's multiple reasons. One, there's a lot of misunderstanding that happens when a new traveler learns the bill rate, because they often don't understand all the stuff that goes into the company and how they pay you. So for example, we get questions like this all the time where somebody will say, the bill rate for my contract is $90 an hour. I'm making $2,300 a week. And it seems like the travel company's keeping 40% of my pay. This is ridiculous. But what they don't understand is there's a lot that comes out of that before you get your take-home pay. There's taxes the company pays on your behalf. There's taxes that you pay to the state, to the federal government. There is disability insurance. There's workers' comp. There is all the staffing company, like all their expenses that go into that. There is all the health insurance and retirement benefits they pay on your behalf. So what it leads to is just a situation where the traveler thinks that they're being taken advantage of, when in reality, the company's not getting even nearly what the traveler thinks that they're getting. So I wrote an article explaining in depth like all the things that go into the bill rate and how much the travel companies actually keep. So if you go to our website and search for how much does the travel company keep or something like that, it's like a 2,000 word article breaking down all of it. But yeah, that's often why they don't want to share it, because there's misunderstandings. Also, even if there's not misunderstandings, there are situations where a company might keep more or less of the bill rate, like actually their margin that they're keeping, the amount that they're making in profit, depending on the situation, depending on, there might be a contract that's paying $100 an hour to the travel company as a bill rate, and there might be a contract paying $70 an hour, and they want to pay, they don't want to offer such a low pay package to this person, so they might allocate some of the money from one contract to another. They do things like that. So you run into situations where it's going to cause confusion. But if you're a traveler that understands all this stuff, you understand all that goes into it, then there's a lot of recruiters that don't mind sharing the bill rate with you, and they'll say, this is the best we can do. Here's what we're getting. Here's all that goes into it. This is what you're making. We can't really budge on this. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. There's some recruiters that are great that don't share bill rates. There's some recruiters that are great that do share it. But it's definitely another layer of transparency for sure.
Yep. So short answer is it depends on the company.
Yeah,
and
it
the
depends.
recruiter. All right. Which travel companies have the most jobs? So this, again, depends. I feel like everything we say, it depends. Different travel companies are going to have different numbers of jobs, and it also really depends on like which settings and locations and discipline you are. So certain companies might have more jobs for, physical therapists, and some other companies might have more jobs for SLPs. Some of them work more with schools, some of them work more with outpatient. In general, I would say that, some of the bigger companies, like the bigger name companies, are going to have more jobs than the smaller companies, but it doesn't always mean that they're going to have more jobs that you want. It really just varies a lot. So we've gone through the process of interviewing dozens of companies over the years to try to get like a good range of different companies that have different types of jobs and which ones have more and less and that sort of thing. So we generally recommend talking to 2 or 3 companies, so that way you're getting a good variety of jobs across a few different companies. And it's a good thing to get recommended from another traveler or from us, which companies have jobs that you want. So like if your friend says, oh, I love this company, but they only take school contracts. Well, if you're not somebody who wants to take school contracts, that company might not be a good fit for you.
Yeah.
So that's where, we can give you some good advice about like which ones might have the most jobs that fit your search criteria.
Yeah. So yeah, in general, big companies have more jobs, but that doesn't mean they're going to have jobs that fit what you're looking for. There's definitely situations where we'll send people to a very small company that has very niche jobs just because that's what they want. So it doesn't matter if a company has 1,200 jobs. If you want pediatrics in California and the company you're working with has mostly home health, SNF, and outpatient. So it doesn't matter necessarily which companies have the most jobs if you want something specific.
Yeah. So if you guys are interested in, specifically getting recommendations for like what criteria you're looking for, what settings, what states, that sort of thing, you can fill out our recruiter recommendation form on our website and we can help point you in the right direction. You can also indicate on your form, I read all of them, about, what else is important to you, like benefits or CEUs or that kind of thing. And I can kind of narrow down like, oh, this company tends to have better, XYZ versus this one. Like is mentorship important to you, that sort of thing. So. All right. The next couple of questions here are more financial. So we got one. Do you have any resources for getting more information on how to get started with FIRE? And for those that aren't familiar, FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. Our last video we did a couple weeks ago was actually about financial independence. So I think that's why we kind of got some questions here about financial independence. So this person is wanting to know, she has a couple different questions, but the first one is, are there resources to get more information on how to get started with FIRE?
Let's say the 2 best resources. There's a book called The Simple Path of Wealth. I think that is like very simple. Like if you wanted to look at nothing else, read that book, follow what it says, you'll probably be better off than 95% of people. That's probably my top recommendation. I would say, if you want to learn a little bit more, there's the Choose FI podcast, Choose Financial Independence, but just the abbreviation. And especially their first like 30 or 40 episodes were really good. They went in depth on pretty much everything to do with financial independence. Nowadays, it's kind of like us. Like at some point, you kind of cover all the relevant topics on whatever you're talking about, and it's just ways to rehash the same stuff. But those first like 40 episodes, you'll get a lot of value from, and they cover pretty much everything you need to know.
So the next question was, if you're trying to achieve financial independence, are there particular calculations that you have to do in order to reach that goal?
The only real calculations, you want to obviously have a pretty good understanding of what your expenses are per year, per month, and then multiply that by 12 or however you want to do it. But you want to know how much your expenses are per year and then multiply that by 25. And that basically gives you a target for what you want to have saved and invested in order to achieve financial independence. The reason for that is Uh, the data shows that if you're withdrawing 4% of your portfolio each month, your odds of running out of money doing that is extremely low. So most year, the market on average returns 8 to 9%. So you'd say like, oh, well, why would I withdraw 4%? That doesn't make any sense if I'm going to get 8 to 9%. Well, the reason for it is because there are periods of time like the 1970s and the 2000s and the 1930s where you'll have a whole decade of really, really terrible returns. And so if you are unlucky enough to retire at the beginning of that decade, well, your returns might be negative 10% per year for 5 or 6 years or something. And so if you retire then, you're withdrawing 8 or 9%, you're going to be in terrible shape. You're going to completely run out of money within probably a decade. So the 4% rule is very conservative. And even backtesting to the 1930s, it still survived that. So that is what that came from, is being very conservative with how much you're able to withdraw so that you don't run out of money. So your expenses times 25 basically gives you an estimate of what that will be.
And the last follow-up question that she had about the calculations is, on average, how long would it take for someone to achieve financial independence?
This 100% depends on your savings rate. It's really the only thing that matters when you're trying to reach financial independence. I wrote an article, I can't remember what I titled it, but it was on the Fifth OPT blog, something why the savings rate's the only thing that matters or something like that if you search for that. Basically, if you're saving 50% of your income, then of your after-tax income, it might take you somewhere around 12 to 13 years. If you're saving more aggressively, it's going to take less time. If you're saving more aggressively, if you're saving less aggressively, it's going to take you more time. If you're saving more aggressively, it's going to take you less time. So like Whitney said, for us, we saved extremely aggressively, especially me. I was pretty much between 85 to 90% of my take-home pay was going towards either 401k or HSA or towards brokerage accounts. So that's why it took us such a short amount of time. But if we were saving, 30% of our take-home pay, it might take us 20 years. So it all depends on how much you're saving, how quickly you can get there.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you start digging into this stuff, if you go and check out the Choose FI podcast, there's a Choose FI book. You can start Googling and learning more about, or read The Simple Path to Wealth and find out more about financial independence. When you start digging into the numbers, like Jared said, it's really important to understand how much you're spending in order to know how much you need to save to live safely in retirement without earning more income. And so once you know how much money you need, then you can do the calculations, but it also depends on how much money you're making now and how much of that money you're saving. So the how long will it take very much depends on your personal numbers and your personal financial situation. If you start listening to the Choose FI podcast, you'll hear all kinds of stories where people, they have like financial independence and they have like lean fire and fat fire. That means like fat fire is like you want to live more extravagantly. So you want to have, millions saved in order to feel comfortable retiring at that amount. Or if you're like lean fire, you're like, I plan to always be frugal, so I don't need that much saved. And then there's like coast fi, which is probably what I would say. Like, I've never done my numbers before, but I would say probably like I'm at coast fi because it's like I just don't have to work much to maintain my lifestyle and like feel comfortable with the amount that I have saved. So there's a whole rabbit hole you can go down learning more about financial independence.
Yeah, I would say the average is probably 15 to 20 years. But if you save extremely aggressively, you can cut that down a lot.
All right. So the next question we got a little bit about finances was, if you were starting your financial journey now as a travel therapist and you were already a parent, how would you go about doing it? So if you already had kids and you're trying to start traveling now and get into financial independence, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's some big things that I think we would do differently. Like if we had started traveling and we already had a baby, I think probably the most important thing for you guys that don't have kids yet, when you do, like you want to make sure that everything you're doing is going to be best for the kid, right? Or at least harmful to the kid, right? So I think my first priority would be trying to be somewhere where childcare is easy, I would say, or affordable or something like that. So first thing I would think about, is there anywhere that I can take travel contracts where I might have friends or family that maybe can help with your child? If that's not a possibility, then at least going somewhere where childcare is not insanely outrageous, or they have like waiting lists, right? Because there's some places in the country where you can't even get into a daycare. So if you have a baby and you have two people working, what are you going to do? So thinking about that would be probably the first priority. Second, I think that we've talked a lot about RVs and whether it makes sense or not. I think with a family, an RV makes a lot of sense. So we would probably go the RV route. We would make sure, obviously, to go to contracts where there's plenty of campgrounds that aren't too expensive. Usually that's more rural areas. We would also probably take longer contracts because that's less disruptive to the baby, the routine, again, the childcare, all that stuff. So we'd probably try to stay 9 months or a year in places instead of moving every 3 to 6 months like we did.
And also that being less disruptive is one thing for taking longer contracts, but also from the financial aspect, because I specifically asked, like, how would you start, your financial journey? You're going to make and save more by not having those downtime between contracts. So if you can stay at one contract longer, then you don't lose money by switching contracts to the next one and having to take time off.
One other thing I think would be extremely helpful that I would 100% one or both of us would do is take home health contracts. For a variety of reasons. One, they pay more, and two, you have so much more flexibility. So say your baby's sick or, childcare falls through or whatever. There's plenty of situations with home health where you could maybe only go see patients for 4 hours, come back and do your documentation at home with the baby, and not have to be gone for 8 or 9 hours like you might at an outpatient job or a hospital-based job. You might not be able to do that every day, but you could kind of shift your schedule around on the fly so that maybe you're seeing 4 people this day and then you're going to see 6 people the next day when you do have childcare or the baby's not sick or whatever. So I think home health is just so much more flexible and you make more money. So yeah, one or both of us would probably do home health. I think that would make a big difference with traveling with a baby.
Yeah, and a lot of that was assuming that we would both work. I'm not really sure if our lifestyle was different, if we already had family, if both of us would work or not work. A lot of times it works better for people just to have one person working and not the other parents. That way that's built in childcare. But I still think trying to find contracts near family or friends would be really helpful, even if only one of you is working, because it's just like, even with both of us only working from home right now, it's still really helpful to have family. We shout out to those of you that live away from family and have kids. It's super hard. Like, it's really nice to have help. So yeah, those are some considerations if we were to start travel now with a family. Now there's another question from a completely different person, but along these same lines. So his question is, do you believe that achieving financial independence is possible if you're a family of 3 doing travel therapy while only having one income? So they would only be living on one income and investing off that one income. The wife was going to be a stay-at-home mom. He goes on to say that we live below our means. We take higher paying contracts. We only have a mortgage. We currently max out 401k and continue to max out IRAs.
Yeah. Another good question. I think it's definitely possible. And I think probably it makes the most sense for people if you think about it. So I actually had a post, I can't remember exactly how it happened, but on Reddit, I was responding to somebody and they were saying, like, you should never travel with kids. It's so bad for them, all this stuff. But what I think a lot of people don't understand about that, like, this was a therapist saying that, like, I would never travel. I think permanent jobs and stability is good for kids. I think what they don't understand is that you can make so much more as a travel therapist, right? So let's say, for example, Whitney and I, if we both took permanent jobs, we would make about the same amount take home as if one of us took a travel job and the other one stayed at home. So I don't think it's fair to say, like, is a travel job worse for a kid than a permanent job? Because it's not the same situation. Either you're going to make a lot more money with both of you working, or you're going to make the same amount of money with only one of you working, as you would both working permanent jobs. So that being the case, I think travel can make a lot of sense, because then the kid actually, or kids, get to spend more time with one or two parents versus a perm job where they might have to go to daycare and they only see their parents for 2 or 3 hours a day, right? So if you're comparing apples to apples, I think travel can be really good for kids because they get more time with one or both parents. So in this situation, I mean, what would the alternative be? The alternative would be that you're at home. I don't know what your wife does, if she's a therapist or not, but that type of situation. Or would you both be working perm jobs where you'd make the same amount with just you working a travel contract, in which case you both would be working and the kid would be going to daycare, you'd have more expenses, and you'd be making about the same amount of money? Well, that doesn't really make sense, because now you're paying for daycare and you're not getting to spend as much time with the kid, and you're making the same amount of money. So I think traveling with a stay-at-home parent it makes a lot of sense. I think.
I think the big thing here, like the elephant in the room here, is that there's not the stability of being at home, and you may not have the family support structures. But to play devil's advocate a little bit, a lot of people don't have that anyway. We know lots of people that don't live near family. They have just the parents and the kids, and that's it. They choose not to live near their parents, the grandparents and everything. So it depends on your situation and what, sacrifices you want to make. Obviously traveling is really cool and amazing, and you're going to have these cool experiences for you and your family, but some people might value having that stability and being closer to home. So even if the financial aspect of it was in favor of doing the travel, they may not want to. But it sounds like you already have been a travel therapist and are wanting to see if it's possible to continue traveling and achieve financial independence if your wife stays at home and you guys go on the road. I definitely think it's possible.
For sure.
One thing that's really beneficial in this situation is if you're only looking for one contract, you can chase down the highest paying contracts in the lowest cost of living areas because you're not having to look for two contracts like you would if you were a couple.
Yeah, and like we said in the last question, I think taking longer contracts, maybe considering an RV so you have a little bit more stability with your living environment and situation there can make a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible, and I honestly think that it might be better overall in terms of trying to reach financial independence than both of you working and a kid going to childcare.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So sorry, that was a lot of finance stuff, but hopefully that was helpful to the folks that asked the questions, as well as some of you that might be wondering that as well. Again, if you are watching live, we'd love if you just say hello in the comments, hit the like button, leave us a question if you have one about travel therapy, finance, whatever you want to ask us. You can ask us a personal question, whatever you want. All right, next question. Any advice for a new grad who's nervous about jumping into travel therapy versus taking a permanent job?
Yeah, this is an easy question for us because this is the situation we were in 10 years ago. We were both nervous about taking travel contracts. We had everybody tell us it was the wrong thing to do. There was no real information out there. We didn't really know anybody that had done it as a new grad. So, yeah, it was scary. And the way we chose to kind of deal with some of that was we took our first contracts close to home. We've kind of told this story before, but we were a little over an hour away from home, so we could still go home on the weekends. And our idea was like, okay, if we hate it, we'll do it for 3 months. We'll be done. We're not even that far away. We'll just go back home, get permanent jobs. So anybody that's nervous about trying it or starting it, take a job a couple hours from home or, not that far so that you still have a little stability with your friends and family. You can kind of go home on weekends if you want to. You can see if you like it. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. There's always going to be perm jobs out there, especially now for therapists. There's just an abundance of open jobs. So it's not like you have to sign up forever and there's no other option. You're going to have options. So, yeah. And the best thing about travel is after 3 months, you can decide then. You can go back and reassess. Is this something you want to do? Did it seem like you had a good experience? Do you want to extend the contract or do you just want to be done with it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to get your feet wet, like not far from home. And just keep in mind that a lot of travel jobs are permanent jobs. They're just in a different location than where you live. But if you lived in that city that was 2 hours away or that rural town that's 2 hours away, then that would be a perm job that you might be applying to in that town. And so, yeah, they may offer the same level of support and mentorship and everything that as though you were taking a permanent job there. So it doesn't hurt to interview for some jobs. Doesn't hurt to take a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract. It's not going to be forever. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back home and take a permanent job at that time.
Yeah. And I know, again, this is a story we've told several times, but that's exactly what happened with my first contract. Is it was a hospital. I didn't even know anything about hospitals. They've been trying to hire a perm person for years. And I talked to the manager. She said that they would really help me out. They would give me time to shadow, partial caseload so I could learn. And I mean, it would have been the same thing. I got the same experience as a traveler as I would have if I took a perm job. And it was only an hour and 20 minutes from home. So really not that much difference, except that I was making significantly more money.
Yep. Lynn says, hi, Jared and Whitney. Greetings from Louisiana. Appreciate you guys sharing your experiences. Hey, Lynn, thanks for joining us. We're happy to share. Glad you're here. All right, this question cracked me up. This person said, quote, taxes have me shaking in my boots. Any tips before I start traveling? And then there was another question by a different person that just said taxes. So people want to know about taxes. They're nervous about it.
So we've made a few videos about taxes. Taxes, I mean, I guess I understand people are always nervous about taxes. But being a traveler doesn't really make your taxes that much more difficult at all. So if that makes you feel any better, you're going to have to deal with taxes if you take a perm job or a travel job. A travel job pays you a W-2, just like a perm job would pay you. Almost all perm jobs are going to be that way. So it's not very different. You don't have to write off expenses now that the standard deduction for the last, I think it was like 2017, 2016, 17. Standard deduction's higher. There's no personal exemptions. You can't write off workplace expenses. It just simplified everything quite a bit. So you're not going to have a lot of deductions to worry about. You're not going to have 1099s to worry about. You're going to get a W-2. The only harder part is filing multiple state returns. And honestly, that's not that difficult. You can easily figure that out now. I figured it out 9, 10 years ago when we started, and there was way less information. So I did our taxes myself for the first 5, 6 years that we were traveling. So it's not that difficult. You can definitely figure it out. I had no clue about taxes before then, but it's certainly not as difficult as you would think it would be. The only thing that I would say, in addition to filing multiple states, it's a little bit of a hassle, is your tax home situation. So you do need to figure that out.
Before you get in the tax home situation, to clear up some of the confusion, I think where people get confused about taxes is they think that because they're a travel therapist, they're a contractor. And a contractor is like a 1099 employee. That's a completely different thing. That is where it would be more confusing and you'd have to do a lot more legwork. And that's where people get hung up on things like deductions and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you were an independent contractor at a clinic, say you did it at a SNF in your hometown, that would be more complicated than if you took a travel contract, because then you really do have to track your expenses, write all that off. You have to file as a sole proprietor, all that stuff. But travel is really not that difficult.
Yeah, so when you work as a travel therapist, you actually work through the travel therapy staffing agency as their employee. So when you take a contract with a staffing agency, you become just like an employee of theirs, like you would become an employee of a hospital. So you get a W-2 tax form, just like a regular employee, and then you just file that. And so like Jared was saying, in addition to that, because you're a W-2 employee and because of the new tax rules, you can't write off all these other expenses too, because you're already getting a stipend for the housing, the meals and incidentals and stuff. So you just don't even have to worry about all that. Like, stop trying to hack the system, because there's no hack you can do with that. You just put on your tax, either give to your tax preparer if you choose to use one, or if you choose to do the software on your own on the computer, you just type in the numbers that it says on your W-2, and that's it. And like Jared said, the only really complicated part is multiple states. The federal part's easy, but if you have more than one state, it can get a little bit confusing, but it's not that bad. And if you work for more than one travel company for a different contract, you just get more than one W-2. So you just enter the first form, done with that form, enter the second form, done with that form.
Yeah. So besides that, the only thing is making sure you have a tax home, following those rules, which is definitely way more difficult or confusing than anything to do with actually filing your taxes. So we've got a lot of articles and videos about tax homes. Just make sure that you have all that nailed down before you start.
Yeah, and I think in a little while we have another question. Well, I'll go ahead and answer it now, actually, because so like Jared said, you want to go ahead and look into what is a tax home. How does it work? How do I get it set up? That doesn't necessarily have to do with filing your taxes. So you don't ever actually submit any information to anyone about your tax home. It's just more if you were to get audited. So you want to look into what a tax home is, make sure you have it all squared away, make sure you have a paper trail, a lease, show where you're paying expenses, all that sort of thing. If you were to ever get audited, that might come into play. Some of the travel therapy companies will want to know that you're maintaining a permanent residence. They're not going to go into as much depth as like an IRS auditor would to know whether you really had a tax home, but they're just trying to, cover themselves by saying, do you have a permanent residence? And you have to give them an address.
Exactly. And that is a big misconception that we see. A lot of people, I've seen this on like Reddit and stuff where people are anonymous. They say like, oh, you don't really need a tax home. You just need an address that you put down. That's all the companies care about. That's all the companies care about, because they don't care if you have a tax home or not. They just want to, if it ever comes back and there's a question about it, they say, I don't know, the person said that they did, and here's the address they gave us. We did our part. That doesn't at all help you in terms of like, if the IRS auditor asks you questions, oh, well, why are you getting these stipends? Why were you eligible for it? And all that, like, that's when your tax home situation actually matters. So, it doesn't matter what the travel company says or what they ask you. You want to make sure that you're you're actually following the rules, because if you're ever audited, they're not going to at all have anything to do with it. They're just going to say, I don't know, you said that you had one.
Yeah, and so just a basic overview of the tax home rules is that you have to have a place of residence that is your permanent home, that you're going back to at least 30 days a year. So you can't abandon the home. You need to have expenses in the area. So you need to be paying fair market rent, or a mortgage in the area. And then the third thing is that you need to conduct business in the area. Business is vague. Everything with the IRS is vague, but those are the three basic rules. Again, we have videos and articles where we go in a lot more depth. And if you really are wanting to know about tax homes, we recommend setting up a tax home consult with a travel tax expert. We have one that we can refer you to. Along that line, the next question that we got about taxes was, if I would like to change my tax home to a new location, what would I need to do? And so this is where a lot of people get confused. They're like, oh, well, I'll just change my address and I'll start paying money at that address now, and now that will be my tax home.
Yeah. So first things first, every situation is different. So if this is you, or you want to change your tax home, or you have any questions about your tax home, don't ask us the question. Just pay somebody $50 that is an expert that can actually give you professional advice. I would much rather just pay somebody a little bit of money to have peace of mind versus listening to what we say, because we have no idea. Like, all we've learned is from CPAs that we've talked to. So, but in this situation, what we know to be the case, just from people that we've talked to, if you want to change your tax home location, your tax home is first and foremost the place that you earn the majority of your income. The reason that we in the travel therapy world talk so much about your tax home being, place you have to go back to 30 days a year, duplicate expenses, all that stuff, is because we don't have a place that we primarily earn our income. So if you're moving around all the time, you're earning income in California and Florida and Texas and Chicago, the IRS looks at that and they're like, oh, you don't have a place where you earn all your income. So because you don't, then we go to the secondary criteria, which are the three things that Whitney was talking about. Now, the reason that that's important is because if you want to change your tax home location, you can't just change the address and then say, okay, now I'm paying money here, I'm going to meet these three criteria, because the IRS is going to say, like, well, why is that your tax home? You haven't earned any income there. How could that be a place that you move to when you don't ever earn income there? So our understanding is that if you wanted to change your tax home, you need to work in this new location for a period of time to show that, okay, this is my new place, this is where I'm earning some income, and then you go back to travel. So say you take a local contract for 3 months there, or you go work a perm job for 3 or 6 months or something like that, and then you travel after that. Okay, well, now it's clear that this is your new tax home location. But if you just say, I changed my address, I'm paying money to this new place, it doesn't make any sense from the IRS's perspective, because why is this your tax home if you've never earned money there? So that's our understanding of, again, always talk to a CPA that can give you more detailed advice.
Yeah, so if you want specific tax home information, reach out to us. We can give you the contact information for the tax professional that we recommend. But yeah, bottom line, don't mess around with the tax home stuff. Just talk to a tax professional, get that squared away, make sure it's all good to go before you start traveling, in case you were to ever get audited. But when it comes to actually filing taxes, not that complicated.
Yeah.
All right. Next question that we got. Do I need to have multiple recruiters in order to find a good contract?
Not necessarily, but it certainly helps. So we know people for sure that have only worked with one recruiter, one company, their whole travel career. They've had a good experience. Probably part of the reason they've had a good experience is because they don't know any different. Like, if you only work with one company, one recruiter, you don't know what another company, what their job options might have been, or what they might have been able to pay you. So you're going to just say, oh yeah, it's been great. And that kind of same sort of situation where people will recommend a recruiter. They'll say, oh, I've had a great experience with this person. And then we're like, well, how many people have you worked with? And they're like, just this one person. It's like, well, you don't even know what a great experience is if you only worked with one person, right? It could be that that person's actually not that good and there's way better recruiters for your situation, but you just don't know it because you've only worked with that one, right? So no, not necessarily. You don't have to work with multiple recruiters, but you have to remember that different recruiters at different companies are going to have different job options, which is going to be important for most people, especially if you have any particular situation you're looking for, any particular setting or location, or if you want the highest pay or whatever. You need more than one recruiter so that you can compare those things. And then we've always said before, if you're only working with one recruiter and they only give you like 2 jobs, they say, these are really the 2 that I think will be best for you. Well, what are you going to say? No. So you only have 2 options. But If you are working with 3 recruiters and you say, I want this specifically, and they send you what they have, well, now you have multiple jobs to choose from, and you can also negotiate there a little bit. You can say, well, my other recruiter has this job in Texas that's outpatient and it's paying even more. Is there any way that you could pay me more for this outpatient job? I like it, but I want to make more money. And that is the easiest way to negotiate, because if you have another recruiter with a higher paying contract and you're trying to get your recruiter to pay you more, they're going to be way more likely to do that than if you just say, I want to make more money, can you pay me more, but you don't have another option.
Yeah, so in general, we think it's a good idea, especially in the beginning when you're first getting started with travel therapy, to talk to 2 or 3 different recruiters and stay in touch with them throughout your first job search and kind of see how that job search goes. Because if you just have the first phone call with recruiters, they're all just going to say they're the best. But you don't really know until you kind of get into the weeds of going through a job search with them. And sometimes you don't know until you've actually been on a contract with one of the companies. But it's a good idea to talk to a few, kind of go through that job search process, have them, tell you all the jobs they have, compare their benefits, all that sort of thing. And then you're going to ultimately take your first contract with one company. And for some people, they'll just decide from then on, like, I tried the other 2, I ended up liking this one the best, I'm just going to stay with this one. And that's totally fine. What we always did was we would have one that we would typically take jobs with, but we would always go back to our second and third and sometimes fourth every job search and say, what options do you have? And we would always consider the options that our second and third and fourth recruiter had, even if we ultimately kind of decided we still want to stay with our number one company. But it's a good idea just to keep your options open and talk to multiple.
Yeah. And I guess a good example there is, say the one company that you primarily take your jobs with, they have only one outpatient job in Virginia and it's paying $2,000 a week. And you say, okay, well, that's pretty good. And then you go to the other one and they say, oh, I've got 3 outpatient jobs and they're paying 22, 23, 2,400. Well, if you didn't ever go back to those companies or that other recruiter, you wouldn't even know that those jobs existed. So, yeah, think about it that way.
All right, couple more questions here. Again, if any of you guys who are watching live have questions, feel free to ask. Have you taken a PRN job during a travel therapy contract? How did you go about doing that, if so?
We have taken a PRN job, I think just one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one time. PRN jobs during a contract are very difficult because most places do not want to hire you PRN short term, because they're going to have to spend some money onboarding you, training you, all that stuff just for you to, maybe work a few hours a week and then leave after 3 months, right? So it kind of has to be the perfect situation. And that's kind of what happened with the PRN job that I took. It's like it was a sniff. They were really desperate for somebody. I worked with a lady at the hospital that already was working PRN there, so I had it in, and it all worked out perfectly. But most of the time, it's not going to be like that. So if it arises and it's the perfect situation, then great. But it's kind of hard to make a PRN job happen as a traveler, unless you're a traveler that you signed a 9-month contract. Say you're working a school contract, then it's certainly possible that a company will hire you for the 9 months that you're going to be there for working evenings and weekends or something like that.
Yep. All right. Looks like we did get one question on Instagram while we've been on live. Hello, do you recommend living off one income, say if you're a traveling duo and both of you are therapists who are working? Do you recommend living off one income if our primary financial goal is to pay off debt? Do you have any recommendations to support this goal? Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. It's like the most simple way to try to save 50% of your income is just pretend you only have the one person working, the other person put all of your money towards loans or towards retirement accounts or whatever it is you want to, or towards like a fund for a down payment or whatever. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then if you can, of course, try to save even more than that if the situation's right. So you find really high paying contracts or you go to low cost living areas and you can save 10 or 20% of that other income. Well, now you're saving a ton of money. In terms of paying off loans, it depends on the situation. So I would say if you have private loans, you probably almost always want to pay those first because usually they have higher interest rates and they have less flexibility in terms of like forbearance, income-based options, all that. I'm always a fan of paying off the highest interest rate debt first. So say you have multiple student loans and some are 6%, 7%, 8%. Well, you want to start with the highest paying or highest interest rate ones because they're accumulating the most interest. Besides that, I can't really think of anything in particular. I would say the only other thing is make sure that you do want to pay them off and you don't want to go income based and maybe invest instead. Like I've written thousands and thousands of words about why we chose to do that. But I think for a lot of people, it can make sense to just make minimum payments, invest all your money, and try to beat the interest rate on your student loans in the market. So just consider that. Definitely not for everybody, but if you don't want to do that, you do want to pay off your loans right away. I think those are the main things.
Yeah, and in terms of living off one income, it really just depends on how you want to strategize. So you said travel duo, so I don't know whether you're married or just a couple. It all depends on whether you really want to, combine your incomes or how you want to do that. We always just kept ours separate, and we just kind of, allocated right off the top into the 401k and the IRA and all that. Just take that out before you ever even see it. And then it's like, okay, boom, I don't even consider that I even had that money. It's just going straight into investments to start with. And then whatever the next bucket is that you're trying to dump money into, you could just do that with your own money and, your partner with their money. Kind of just depends on how you want to do it. There's so many different strategies to personal finance. You could go down so many rabbit holes of like this, we're going to do it this way, or we just pretend that we don't have this one income, or we, whatever it is. There's certain people who do like the Dave Ramsey thing where they have like envelopes of cash for like, this is the cash that we use for the groceries and you can't spend more than that. We never had trouble budgeting, especially with living pretty frugally and earning such high income as travel therapists. We never had to be like down to the penny with groceries or anything like that in order to budget.
I've kind of mentioned this in the past, but it might be helpful for you as well. I guess I'm a naturally frugal person, so budgeting never really made sense to me because I already was not going to spend that much money. So I kind of looked at saving as I think the term is the anti-budget, where I kind of decided how much I wanted to save. I would put that away, and then I would just live off what was left. So depending on the contract, how much I was making, usually I was trying to save somewhere between like 5,000 to 7,000 a month. And I was like, okay, I'm going to put this in my 401k, my IRA, a brokerage account, and then whatever's left is what I'm going to live on. And that usually was not that much money, but it was fine. I could live on that. So that's the way I looked at it, but however works for you.
Yeah. So instead of, the extreme of like putting it into cash envelopes, you may just want to look at it like if you need that self-control of like, as soon as it hits my bank account, I'm going to transfer it into the 401k, the IRA, the 401k would automatically come out of your paycheck via the employer, but the IRA, or transfer it into my savings account so that each week, each month, I only see this amount in my checking account, and that's how much I have to spend. So yeah, just depends on how you and your partner would want to do that. But you're gonna be in a great financial position if you're already asking these questions and thinking this way.
Yeah.
Before starting traveling.
For sure. As travelers, have you noticed increased demands of therapists throughout the years, leading to more burnout? It appears to be in multiple settings, with more therapists considering leaving the field. I would like to hear your thoughts. Yeah, yes. For sure.
Yeah, we hear this a lot. We hear from so many therapists who are feeling burnt out and wanting to leave therapy. And a lot of them, that's how they end up in travel, because they're like, I need to try this before I like completely leave. But we know so many that have just stopped being therapists and gone into other fields.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what drove us down the path of like financial independence, semi-retirement, that kind of thing. And we've written and talked about burnout in the past. As a traveler, you make more money, so that means you don't have to work as many hours if you don't want to. You can make the same amount of money working less hours or working less weeks per year. So, like we've talked in the past about like, okay, maybe you work a contract, take 3 months off, work a contract, take 3 months off. And now in 6 months as a traveler, you can make what you would in a perm job, but you have half the year off. For a lot of people, that kind of solves the whole burnout issue. Or, even taking a month off or whatever. Like a lot of people just need like a time to reset, to think about things, and then they're ready to jump back in. For other people, that's not the case. Maybe they need that with a combination of changing settings, or, burnout is different for everybody. Maybe you just need to work a PRN job where you're working 20 hours a week at home and, that makes you feel better. Or maybe it's a part-time travel contract. We've done part-time travel contracts. They're not as common, but you can find situations where that will work. So yes, certainly way more burnout. There's different ways to handle it for different people. I think
it's tough out there for therapists. I mean, he said specifically, have you noticed increased demands of therapists causing to the burnout? Yeah, things are not in a good way with therapy, with rising cost of living, rising tuition, especially with physical therapy and occupational therapy having moved to a doctorate degree, rising student loan debt with rising cost of living. But wages are stagnant because most of our wages are tied to reimbursement rates, and reimbursement rates are stagnant, and even more than stagnant. Sometimes they're trying to cut them. They're trying to, cut Medicare reimbursement and that sort of thing. So traditional therapy is in a bad way in terms of like the financial outcomes. You'll hear a lot of folks that, when they were back in the bachelor's days and master's degree days of our degrees, they're like, oh, well, I paid off my student loans like that, and I'm in a good financial position. And it's like, well, you didn't. We talk to people that have $300,000, $400,000 in student loan debt if they went to like a private school or went out of state. So it's pretty bad. And so in terms of the increased demands, these clinics, especially outpatient clinics, are having to see more patients, bill more units in order to keep their doors open because the reimbursement rates are down. But yet the salaries are not going up for the therapists. So yeah, the demands are definitely up. It's in a bad way.
Yeah, I wrote an article back in like 2017 on the Fifth OPT blog about, is it worth it to be a physical therapist, or is it worth it to be a therapist or something like that? Or is a DPT degree worth it? And I kind of went into some of the math and the student loans and the opportunity costs that you miss by going to grad school and everything. And even back then, I was thinking like, I don't know, like if I'd gotten a job at 22 right out of school and maybe I made less money, but I moved up and I didn't have to take these loans and go to school for another 3 years, is it really worth it? And it's something that people definitely need to think about now more than ever, because yeah, it's gotten only worse since then when I wrote that. And student loans are higher, cost of living is higher, reimbursement rates are lower. And then I also read an article in 2022 when inflation was like really topical. We had 9% inflation for some months that year. And people were asking us like, oh, well, are these jobs going to pay more now that inflation's higher? And no, they're not. And in fact, a lot of jobs are going to pay less because you think about it as a clinic owner working, say, just outpatient. It's the simplest example. But their rent costs are going up, their support staff costs are going up, their electricity costs, their water costs, everything is going up for them, but they're not making more money because the reimbursement rates are going down. So assuming the same number of units billed, they can't pay therapists as much money. So it's like, it's actually even worse for therapists. Not only will you probably not make more money, but you might make less money because their costs are going up. So yeah, that's a major issue.
Yeah, so I mean, we're hearing from folks that they're having to use all kinds of strategies to get around this stuff in terms of, making your career as a therapist more lucrative. One, budgeting, of course, whether you go into travel therapy or not, you're needing to budget more. You're needing to figure out a way to dig yourself out of this financial hole. Try to live below your means early in your career, tackle the debt, that sort of thing. A lot of people are working PRN jobs or multiple PRN jobs in order to earn higher income. Some people are going into like cash pay businesses where they're not tied to the reimbursement rates, so there's not as much of a ceiling on their wages. And then of course some people are getting into travel therapy as well. So yeah, you definitely have to be pretty strategic now to have a lucrative career as a therapist.
And honestly, that's why a lot of people are getting into travel now. We get more and more interest every year from new grads. When we started traveling as new grads, it wasn't even like something most people even considered because jobs still paid pretty decent. Cost of living wasn't too high. Houses cost probably less than half of what they do now 10 years ago. But now like almost everybody graduating is like, wait a minute, I'm going to graduate and make $70,000 a year, but houses cost $500,000. How am I ever going to do that? And I have $300,000 in student loans. What am I going to do? So travel kind of gives you at least an opportunity to make more money and kind of start to get ahead a little bit early in your career.
All right, we have a couple more questions that we got on the live video, and then we have two more that we got in advance. So one question we got on the live: how late is too late to find housing? What time frame would you consider too last minute?
We are big fans. We talked about this in our course some. Big fans of, before you ever accept a contract, at least scout out the housing options to see if there's reasonable possibilities. So like say our recruiter comes to us and they say, we've got a job in XYZ place and outpatient. We will go Google that place, look at Furnish Finder, look at Airbnb, see if there are any reasonably priced options before we ever even say, yes, we're interested in that job. Because if you say yes and you get an interview real quick and then suddenly you're accepting this contract and you don't even know if there's housing, that puts you in a really bad situation. So at least scout it out. Take 10 minutes to Google the place or look on Furnish Finder. And of course, also check out the crime rate and stuff for that city. But look at the housing options, make sure there's something. But if you do know there's something, you don't have to really inquire about it. Then, you accept the job, then you, as soon as possible, really. I would say probably you definitely want to have something lined up at least a week before you start, because that's when it starts getting a little more frantic. But we,
At least a week. Gosh, we usually try to have it like 4 weeks in
yeah.
advance. Usually and this is actually, this goes well with this next question.
And part of it is how far ahead are you accepting the job? Because
Yeah.
there are situations where we've accepted a job 8 weeks in advance, so we have housing lined up 6 weeks in advance.
Right.
But there's also situations where we accepted a job a week before the start date, and then we're trying to find housing that week. So there's not really a too late, but it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, so it goes along with this question. Are most travel contracts available only a month or two before you start? So yes, most travel contracts are listed as an ASAP start because they kind of just found out they need somebody, their staffing shortage, they need somebody ASAP. ASAP usually means within 4 to 6 weeks, like as soon as possible, about a month. So the majority of jobs are listed about a month out, and then that gives you, a month, 6, 8 weeks tops to be narrowing down everything, getting everything in line, setting up your housing. I would say we usually, try to like be interviewing at that 4 to 6 week mark and having the housing lined up like 3 to 4 weeks in advance. Now there are some people that will wait until they get there to find housing. They'll show up on site and get a hotel for a week or an Airbnb or something, and then shop around. So it kind of depends on you and your comfort level. We personally have never done that. We like to have it set up in advance, but every location is going to be different on how easy it's going to be to find your housing.
We're also the type of people that took a 5-month international trip and had 3 months of it booked ahead of time. So there are other people that will take a trip like that and they'll show up to the city and find housing when they get there. So it depends on how much of a planner, how nervous you are about situations. There's some people that are just like, oh, it'll work out, not a big deal, and they find things last minute, and usually it does work out. But we always want to try to avoid that hassle and that stress if we can.
And then along the lines of the question, are most travel contracts available only a month or two before you start? Yes, for the most part. Now, the difference there, for school contracts, quite often they'll know about that in the spring for the fall. So like right now, or even like 2 months ago, they were already listing contracts that start in August for school years, because that's just the way school years work. And then every now and then you'll find a travel therapy contract that knows well in advance that they're going to have a need. For example, like a maternity leave, or it might be like a seasonal thing.
Yeah.
So every now and then you could line something up, several months, maybe 6 months in advance, but that's definitely more rare. Most of the time it's going to be an ASAP start.
Sure.
All right. A couple more questions here. On Instagram, hi, I'm a new grad. I'm wanting to get started in travel. Did you guys ever use private health insurance between contracts? If so, do you have any recommendations? Thanks for all the info.
Yeah, health insurance, it's gotten more complex over the years because it depends on your state mostly. Like there are some states where you have to go through the marketplace. There's not even an option for third-party health insurance plans. So if you don't get health insurance through your employer, the only other option is to go to either their state marketplace or healthcare.gov, the federal marketplace, and find health insurance that way. Our state, you can get third-party insurance, and we've done that in the past. There are some companies that are better than others. Depends on you, depends on how much you use your coverage, things like that, because some are cheap, but they're not good. Some are really expensive, but they're really good. So if you're young and healthy, of course, my bias is to go with a cheaper option that's not as good. Whereas if you know that you're probably going to meet your deductible, well, you probably want to pay a little bit more monthly and have better coverage. So yes, we've done that. It just depends on your situation, depends on your home state. But I would say for most people, going through the marketplace makes the most sense. At least check that out first. And if there's not any good options to the marketplace, then consider third-party options. But yeah.
And then she specifically said between contracts. So we typically didn't sign up for something that was like short-term, just between contracts. It was back when we were first traveling, we usually took took insurance through the travel company. And then if we took some time off, we would either take a short enough gap that where our health insurance would carry over, or when we took a longer gap, the first year that we did it, we just were out of the country during that whole time. So I said this last time, and I don't know the foregone. We went without health insurance in the U.S., which was probably a mistake, but we just didn't have health insurance in the U.S. for that like 5 months.
We had travel insurance, but yeah.
We took travel insurance for like the international trip. But moving forward after that, we stopped using the travel therapy company insurance and we started year round, either using the marketplace or 1 year or 2 years, I went on a private plan. And so we had it all the time, even during contract or not on contract. So in terms of if you're going to take the travel therapy company insurance during contract and you're wanting to know what to take in between, if the gaps are short and you take the same, your first contract and then you take your very next one with the same company, usually your insurance will carry over if it's less than 30 days. Or you could use Cobra if you needed to, which is probably the easiest option. It's kind of hard to get these like short-term plans.
Honestly, we wrote about health insurance on the Travel Therapy Mentor website. It was one of the first things we wrote about like 7 years ago, and most of that still is accurate. What we did for most of the time, if it was a short period and we were going with a different company, is use Cobra. And the really big benefit of Cobra is that it just continues whatever coverage you have, but it also can be applied retroactively. And if you're a little bit of a risk taker, but also kind of smart and want to save money, then you can kind of skip health insurance during that time. And if you had something come up, so say you have 3 weeks and you're going to switch companies, so you can't stay on the company insurance, well, you have the option to sign up for Cobra up to, I think it's 60 days after you leave your job. So you leave your job, you don't have to pay for the Cobra unless you sign up for it and it applies retroactively. So let's say you had a situation where you had to go to urgent care, you got really sick, something like that, a week after you finish your job. Well, you can then apply for Cobra and it will cover you during that period. So you're actually covered, but you only have to pay for it if you use it. If you get what I'm saying. So say that you had that 3-week period and nothing happened. Well, now you were potentially covered by Cobra because you could sign up retroactively, but you didn't need it, so you just don't pay for it, right? So that's what we did. I think that makes sense for a lot of people, but it just depends on your situation.
Yeah. All right. So the last question that we got, unless we get any more on the live, was as a new grad, do the facilities usually, the travel therapy jobs usually provide mentorship or training?
This is definitely not a one-size-fits-all. So you have the whole spectrum of things, just like you would with a permanent job. So there are some permanent jobs where you start there, you're going to get to the facility, they're going to show you how to clock in, they're going to give you like a 30-minute tutorial or something on the documentation system, and then they give you your first patient. So you might get there at 8 and your first patient's at 10, and that's all you get. And there's a lot of travel contracts the same way. On the other hand, there are jobs for sure, like I mentioned earlier, my first contract, my first week was all shadowing. The second week was like a partial caseload. And then the third week is when I started my full caseload. That's definitely not the norm, but there are some contracts like that. Normally the jobs are somewhere in between that, where it's like, we've had a lot where the first day is all training, the second day maybe you have a partial caseload, and then your third day, so the Wednesday of the week you start, you have a full caseload. I would say that's probably more the norm in terms of like your ramp up and training and stuff. In terms of mentorship, it varies drastically. So there are some places that they are almost too overbearing with like wanting to ask you questions about your reasoning and watch what you're doing with patients and all that stuff. And even for us, like our last contract was pretty overbearing, and we've been therapists for 9 years. So some go out of their way to like tell you what you should do, or try, they look at it as helping you, obviously. And then others, they don't care what you do at all. There's no oversight at all. So it really varies a lot. There are some settings where it's more common to get some sort of mentorship than others, but it really depends.
Yeah, so it's really important because it varies so much that it's very important that you ask during your phone interview what type of mentorship, what type of training, what ramp up period there's going to be. You have to ask this and rule out the bad facilities and find the facilities that are going to be a good fit for you as a new grad. The other thing I would say in terms of mentorship, there's a lot of ways you can get mentorship. One, you're going to make sure, there's another therapist of your own discipline on staff. You ask that during the interview. Also, when you start talking to recruiters, it's a good idea to work with the travel therapy company that has a mentorship program so that they can set you up with a mentor that's going to be virtual. It's usually another travel therapist that they'll set you up with. So that's a good resource that you can have. Also, some recruiters work better with new grads than others. So that's where we can help point you in the right direction to get the mentorship that you need in terms of mentoring about the process of travel therapy and identifying good facilities that are a good fit for a new grad. We work with some recruiters that I just don't think would be great to work with a new grad, whereas other ones work with a lot of new grads, and we can kind of point you in that direction of, okay, they'll help hold your hand through this as you get started. And they can say, oh, I've had new grads at this facility before, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different ways that you can find mentorship, but you definitely need to ask those questions as you're getting started, because it's definitely not guaranteed. It's not just built in unless you look for it.
Yep.
So with that said, as we mentioned before, if you guys are thinking about getting started with travel therapy, whether you're a new grad or not, please reach out to us. We can definitely help you. We can answer your questions. We can help you get set up with a good recruiter, or if you want to fill out our recruiter recommendation on our form on our website at traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters, then we can help, point you in the right direction there.
Yep. And we have tons and tons of resources on the website. So if you're a new traveler, you're thinking about traveling, we have a one-on-one series that articles and videos about the most common things we get, questions about health insurance, questions about recruiters, finding housing, tax homes, all those things, pay, the things we get most often. So that's helped thousands of people get started.
Yeah, so check out traveltherapymentor.com if you want the travel therapy information. For those of you that want to dig more into the financial independence stuff and like the student loan questions, I would go to our older blog where Jared writes a lot about the finance stuff, and that's fifthwheelphysicaltherapist.com, or is it just
fifthwheelpt.com.
I should know the URL of our website, Fifth Wheel PT, which stands for physical therapist. So, so check out both websites if you guys have questions. Just hundreds and hundreds of articles on there that can help you guys out.
Yep. All right. I think that's it. I don't think we have any more questions.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in and for all the questions. Hopefully this is helpful.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.